So our custom on Rosh Hashanah morning, second day, is to have a little discussion. There's handouts, yellow sheets that were on the table. I think we made enough copies so that everyone could have 10 and hand them out to their 10. The office was zealous in their preparations for this day. So let's. Let me. The question that I wanted to look at, and this is a bit of a prelude to my sermon on Yom Kippur morning, is what are our responsibilities to others? And so these are not all the texts in the Jewish tradition that talk about this, but they are a different selection of varying opinions from our tradition about our responsibilities to others. And obviously I am thinking, I hope it's clear, I'm thinking about the war in Gaza and our responsibilities to others in that context in particular. But first, let's take a step back. The two Torah texts that are foundational are the first two. And I want to read these and then we could talk about them because there's many questions about what it says and how we define things. So the first text about our responsibility to others is love your neighbor as yourself. Ahavta l'reacha kamocha. That is from the book of Leviticus, and it's pretty much right in the middle of the Torah. So this is the discussion part. Do we have the microphone? Yes. Oh, okay. So here's the first questions. What does love mean? And who is the neighbor? And there's not some right or wrong answer. I'm asking this is our participation. How do we define love? And who does that extend to? Who is the neighbor that we are responsible for? Thoughts? Okay, go ahead.
So I guess to answer the first part, for me, love is caring for someone.
Okay.
And it's showing them, feeding them, if they need something health-wise, doing that, providing for them. That's how I interpret love and showing it. And I guess the neighbor to me is defined as anyone outside of my immediate family.
Okay. So that's a pretty far range.
Yeah, it could be somebody I work with. It could be someone that I meet in the supermarket. They're all, to me, considered a neighbor.
Right. So there's a couple of things that I want to highlight and kind of draw out, and then to continue the conversation. First of all, your impulse in terms of translating love into action is the rabbinic impulse. Like, the rabbis are very skeptical about trying to legislate feelings. They're much more comfortable saying this is what you have to do. So, and I think it's interesting that that's immediately what you jump to. It's like, okay, this is what it means in concrete terms. A neighbor, if at least what I heard you say, that neighbor, there's some relationship. Like I know them in some way.
Well, I kind of do. I
know, but I think that's important in terms of what neighbor means.
Right.
I mean, neighbor is different than some of the other words that the Torah might, in terms of the person who's sort of outside of my orbit.
Or even like stranger. I mean, when I lived in Manhattan, unbeknownst, everybody thought it was very strange. I knew everyone in all 8 apartments on my floor, which is sort of, you don't do that in Manhattan. I feel like I don't want
to say it's strange, Stacey, but okay, it's
but I felt I see you in the elevator. So I do equate stranger and neighbor in some way because every stranger can become my neighbor in just a brief interaction.
Right, but there's a certain proximity in terms of neighbor. Like there's some relationship, there's some context for how I know them or how I build a relationship with them. Other thoughts about this? Love and neighbor. Yeah. Oh, we really should organize this. Look, and I appreciate everyone's patience in terms of the microphone. It's so for people who are participating online, they can hear your comments.
I have nothing. I just wanted to see Bruce walk across there. To me, as neighbor, definition of a neighbor is someone for whom you can have an impact on their life in some way. So it may not be someone who you come in touch with, but it's someone for which your actions can ultimately impact their life, positively or negatively. And love, I guess, to me, love is really boils down to respect.
Oh, interesting. Okay, so that it's in terms of your love is something that you sort of, is it something that's earned or something that you give?
No, it's interesting because the second part says, love your neighbor as yourself. Well, there's some people who hate themselves, so I don't know if that's a really good phrase. But, the way that you'd want yourself to be treated, the way that you expect yourself to be treated, the way you treat yourself, that's how you should want literally the rest of the world to be treated. And to the extent that you can affect that change, you should do so.
Interesting. So there is a rabbinic commentary about like, well, what happens if it's the as yourself piece that you were highlighting. If you don't have good self-esteem, then that's not really a good metric for how you might treat others. So the rabbis actually talk about that, and they say that's why it says Ani Adonai, I am the Lord. It's actually, God that's the arbiter of the respect or love that we offer to others. So I want to make an observation. There's an interesting, if we can highlight the differences of interpretation, it does hinge more, it seems to me, it hinges more on who we define the neighbor as. And there's definitely we can make the observation that between, the right and the left within Jewish tradition and Jewish communities, that, further to the right, neighbor becomes smaller, only those who live in my community or, my group is my neighbor. And in the more liberal side, neighbors could be the whole world. It could be broadened. I like to think that neighbor there's something, I know them in some way. Maybe it's just a passing, it's who I walk past the street every day, although I don't really walk in the suburbs, so that doesn't work. But anyway, you understand what I mean. Someone who I have some interaction with is a neighbor. Now, Suzanne, go ahead. We have two more thoughts. It's going to move us on. It's okay. Keep going. Go. Boom. Bruce, you're doing just such a great job.
Thank you.
Two things. First, I think we need to distinguish who the feelings are towards, but as important or maybe more important is what that message is, because sometimes you have impact on people that you don't even know you're having an impact on it. And as many of you know, I used to teach, and I gave a standard lecture, frankly, on family and marriage and all of that stuff. And I had no idea, the students in my class, what they had gone through or what their personal stories were. And maybe literally 15 years later, one of the students in that class came to me and she said, you have no idea how what you said about family, how it impacted me. And without going, it was a sad story, and I made her feel that there are multiple kinds of family and so on. And I had no idea. So when you're saying what impact you have on others, I mean, obviously, that's where I come back to, since we don't know what the impact of our words will be, and we think we know what in our immediate family, they're but we don't know the wider world. I think we have to go back to the biblical idea that you do the best you can and treat people with dignity and respect, because then you're safe.
Yeah, but I think it's a very important thing that if you start with like just using the biblical word of love, I mean, you don't know where that's going to reach and how that's going to affect someone. And too often we do think about like, well, is this having an impact? And maybe we need to leave that question aside. I think that's a great observation. I think Sherry had Bob.
Made it easy for you. It's not only who you love, but in this day and age, it's what you love.
How do you mean? How do you mean?
How do I mean? Well, I go back to a quote from Golda Meir, where she said, when she was talking about the Arabs, not Palestinians back then, when they love their children more than they hate us, we will have peace. And they love war. They love to hate and die more than they love life. And that's what it seems like to me, and there's a problem there. So it's not just loving someone, but it's loving something or hating something so much.
Well, obviously, hate is the opposite of love. And so I don't want to characterize all others, but I think the important thing is the question is really more what our obligation to others are. You know, what must we do for others? And part of the text here, just I want to hold that thought, Bob, is that part of the text here is what are our obligations to someone who hates us or in fact wants to kill us? There are texts here on the other side that maybe we'll have time to get to that do address that directly. So hold on to that, because I do want to focus on what we're supposed to do. Okay? One more thought before we turn to the second text. So we hope, I may have...
I was just going to go backwards a little bit, because in Leviticus it says, love your neighbor as yourself.
Right.
And something you said, Rabbi, just now, a couple of minutes ago, resonated with me, and you talked about the love that you must feel, that somebody has to feel very confident. And I'm thinking to myself, well, the first part of all this, and everybody brought up some really good points, is you really have to love yourself first. And also something you said in your sermon yesterday, which I repeated at dinner last night, resonated, where you said you started to read the news every morning and it made you very agitated before you woke up, and then you switched to these poems that gave you feelings of warmth and love and confidence and feelings of like strength, you know, in your inner self. And I think that's really important, that we acknowledge that we have to love who we are and feel confident and feel strength in who we are to help other people.
I think that's a great point to emphasize, and also a good point to let us transition to the second text. But you do need a certain amount of self-confidence in order to give just to others, whether it's love or whatever it is. You have to have self-confidence, and that is important. And that's part of what I was trying to talk about yesterday, which is like, you know, we've got to spend some time focusing on our own inner life if we're going to kind of go out into the world. So the second text is from the Torah as well, and it talks, and I chose this text. There are other texts, by the way, vis-a-vis the stranger. There are texts in the Torah that say love the stranger, but I specifically picked something that's negative in terms of do not. So to look at this, and by the way, just as a parenthetical note, there are only three loves commanded in the Torah. One we're very familiar with, v'ahavta, love God, love your neighbor, and love the stranger. Those are the only commandments to love in the entire Torah. And there is far more written about our obligations to the stranger, who my sense is immediately that's somewhat farther out from the neighbor. Like, what do we have? A stranger to me, and you could tell me if you disagree with this, I don't really know them. There's someone who I'm unfamiliar with. There's, you know, something about, I don't have that neighborliness or family. They're a little bit outside. And so here, this text says specifically, you shall not oppress a stranger. Why? Because you know the feelings of the stranger, having yourselves been strangers in the land of Egypt. This is a very frequent refrain in the Torah, that in a sense, the lesson we learn from slavery is how we're supposed to treat others, because we know what it feels like. That is like a fundamental lesson or impact that the Torah draws from our own history and our own experience. We know what it's like, so we can't do it to others. Now, again, the question is, who is the stranger? And what does not oppress mean? I mean, like, we got like two big words here. So who do you see as the stranger? If you were to give me examples. Kathy, you have, I think that's your hand, yes?
Several years ago, Rabbi, you referred some of us to the book, I think I have it, Letters from My Palestinian Neighbor.
Oh, Yossi Klein Halevi's book.
And that had great impact on me, and I recommended it to a lot of people. John is shaking his head also. And to me, that fits this perfectly, because it gave a perspective that I don't think many of us had at the time, just across the wall, what it was like to be across the wall from someone who didn't have the freedoms that we had and didn't have the abilities that we had. And it still impacts me. And every once in a while, I pick it up and read another one of the letters. So, you know, I think this causes us to take a look at who the neighbors are of Israel and how we look at them and in what light we put them.
But so part of the question might be, how does a stranger become a neighbor? I mean, like, you know, where is that movement? You know, because I think part of our tendency, if you will, is to keep people who make us uncomfortable, just as a general term, keep them at a distance. We keep them as strangers. Bruce?
Oh, sorry. I think there's the word stranger starts with strange, and so I have an inclination myself sometimes to see somebody doing something strange and to think that, well, that's weird, that's not how I do it. And so once I think what I've tried to do is to say, wait, that might not be strange, and then once you get to that point of recognition that what they're doing isn't strange, it's a different type of custom, it's something that you're not, you know, might not be how you do things at home, but maybe the ideology behind that is the same as what yours is at home. And then you get to the neighborly place.
Right. That's nice in terms of how we move it from how someone moves from being a stranger to closer and a neighbor. It's a very, very important question. So again, a little bit of a framework. There's a divide among Jewish interpreters. The more traditional interpreters take the Torah's word of ger and says that means a convert, because that is the word we use for someone who converts to Judaism. So in the sort of more traditional world, they take all of these texts to talk about someone who has converted and, in other words, come into the community. That's who we have to remind ourselves to treat in a certain way, because our impulses do otherwise. And there is evidence among biblical scholars talk about that ger might have been a technical term. In other words, someone who's not an Israelite, but is kind of living among the Israelites. You know, he or she has some relationship to the community, and so you got to make sure you don't treat him or her differently than someone who's born into the tribe. That's kind of the Bible's sense of it and the Torah's sense of it. But again, in the more liberal circles, stranger is seen as someone who's very far away and outside. And often when we're talking about the Israel-Palestinian conflict, talking about Palestinians in terms of how they should be treated and not oppressed. And that these texts often inform that. Suzanne, question? Question or thought?
So that's really interesting, because it seems to me that so far you've been talking about this in geographic, near and far. But what if the stranger and the, you know, one of us, if you will, is not in terms of distance, but in terms of values? Right. So therefore, when you say come into the fold or near the fold, it's not necessarily that you're an Israelite, but that you share our values.
Right, so there's a certain, I think the Bible's assumption is that this person who is living among the tribe, you know, has made a commitment, you know, a certain commitment to the group. And I think you make a great observation that, you know, neighbor and stranger, maybe it's not one of distance, maybe it's a distance in terms of, you know, how we think or how we act. And bridging that can almost be more difficult than walking across the street. You know, if we really see ourselves operating according to different values, how is that overcome and how is that bridged? And that's a really important question. And I just want to, I'm not trying to solve this dilemma, in terms of this discussion, but I think it's really interesting to look at this and say, like, defining neighbor and stranger and love and don't oppress, these are big words, and just unpacking those is difficult. Mike, I think you have a thought.
Yeah, we have a word in English when we estrange somebody.
Oh, okay.
We create a stranger. And just as we create a stranger, just as we shut somebody out, we can bring somebody in.
That is a beautiful observation, that the term stranger is one that we label and we put on someone else. I mean, no one comes to your door and says, I'm a stranger, so yes, okay, there you go, Billy Joel reference. Okay, so we'll add that to next high holidays. So look, that's a great, we have the ability to transcend that distance. However, whatever the distance is, whether it's one of space or we see it as values, we can overcome it in terms of that. Yeah, okay. Wow, we may not get through 2 pages. Okay.
I think my comment might bridge to the next one, but as you're talking about stranger versus neighbor and the Israel-Palestine conflict and all the things everyone has been saying, I was also thinking about, as a people Israel, we do bring in the stranger, right? There are Palestinians and Arabs living in Israel, right? So we say, come in, we want to get to know you, right? You can be part of our community and part of our neighborhood and, not just be a neighbor. But if you're looking at the Palestinian part of the conflict and why it's so difficult for us not to be strangers to them, is that there are no Israelis that are living in Palestine because they don't want to get to know us as their neighbors because of the hate that was talked about earlier. So I think that when you're defining those 2 terms, we have to think about, are you willing to accept the stranger? If the other side is not willing to accept us as the stranger, then that oppression part doesn't quite fit, because we're bringing you in and we're saying we don't want to oppress you. Come on in.
So I think what you're pointing out, if I can just kind of take a step back, it's like there has to be a certain amount of mutuality. In terms of it has to be so that but it's an interesting thing. In other words, if we both have to not treat each other as a stranger, and if we want to go back to the first text, we both have to say we're neighbors. But I think it's very difficult to characterize, how the other side feels in terms of this. We're more certain about our own feelings and our own fears and our own worries. And so that, I think, is the challenge. I want to bring us to another text that I think is going to, it's not about, obviously, Israelis and Palestinians, but it's very practical and very, it's just sort of like there's only enough resources for one. How are we going to do this? This is a very famous Talmudic story or discussion, and it's what I alluded to in my sermon yesterday, so I wanted to make sure we talk about it. If 2 people are walking on a desolate path and there was a jug of water in the possession of one of them, and the situation was such that if both drink from the jug, both will die, as there is not enough water, but if only one of them drinks, he will reach the destination, the settled area. There is dispute as to the halakha being the Jewish law. Ben Petura taught, it is preferable that both of them drink and die, and let neither of one of them see the death of the other. This was the accepted opinion until Rabbi Akiva came and taught that the verse states, and your fellow shall live with you, indicating that your life takes precedence over the life of the other. So, who's ever got the jug of water, who's ever got the resources to kind of broaden it, and if there's only enough resources for my family and me, well, then it's ours and not yours. Because the idea, the way Akiva's understanding this verse is you're supposed to live. Someone's supposed to live. And so if both die, then you're not living according to this. So thoughts about this. First of all, what do you think about Ben Petura? He's like, you shouldn't, better you both should die. No one should. Do we want to vote? I don't know if we want to take a vote or something like that. If you're going to like throw me off the island or something, if you've got the jug of water, so I'm feeling. Go ahead. Wait. So others, because no one's people can hear you.
I guess the first thing I think about is what you just said. No, both of you shouldn't die, right? I can't imagine that would be God's will, that you're both going to die. Someone has to live, and in the hopes of that person living, perhaps there's a chance they can save the other. And in some way, I disagree with, well, if both of us drink, then neither one has to see the other die. Either way, somebody's going to die. So if we both drink, we both die, we both watch each other die, that doesn't make any sense to me. And I think it comes down to, I guess, a lot of God's will of who the stronger is and who will ultimately prevail with that
however,
jug.
in this case, it's like, who's got the jug of water?
It doesn't matter. If you have the jug and you're weak, I'm going to take that jug from you. I'm going to drink. I'm going to live.
All right, go get him.
And
Definitely not going on the island with Stacy. Okay, so.
and perhaps I will be able to save you. But if you're, and then we both can, can prevail. But it's sort of when the kids say, who's, between you or dad, like, well, who's going to save us all, really? Like, you make these things with them.
It's really,
it's strength and strength from God, ultimately.
It's a really tough text.
Sorry.
Go ahead. Some more thoughts.
So I can see an argument on both sides, because on the one hand, charity begins at home, so you take care of yourself, your family, so on, good. On the other hand, although it's not, I think, technically in the Bible, if you think of the miracle of Hanukkah, they had enough for one candle, and the miracle was that it lasted 8 days. So in theory, if you split the water, the miracle could happen that you both could live.
Okay.
I like happy endings.
Yes, it would be nice, but there's not really. So you want to re-understand the story with a happy ending, and with a possibility for a happy ending. Okay, that's fair. That's a nice approach. That's good. Go ahead.
All right, what happens if it's, let's say, two family members? Let's say.
They have a relationship.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the mother or father and is with a child, and you go, the mother or father, I can't drink the water. I have to give it to my child. But then knowing that the child, even if they drank the water, probably wouldn't make it either.
Right. So here's the interesting thing about this story. I think the Talmud intentionally says two people. You don't know their names, right? You don't even, and it kind of implies that they're not best buds. They're not neighbors, if we're using back the other text. And by the way, there's, the Torah text for yesterday, the Torah reading for yesterday, the story of Isaac. We rarely ever talk about this, but the end of chapter 21, which is part of the reading, is the story of Hagar and Ishmael, the Abraham's first child through Hagar, not through Sarah, because when Isaac is born, Sarah's like, get rid of that other kid. Like, I'm being crass. They're competition for my boy. I want them out of the house, out of the tent. And so Hagar and Ishmael go into the wilderness, and Abraham doesn't send them with enough supplies. And Hagar says, I can't watch my boy die. And she leaves him, and she cries, and God responds and provides, miraculously, there's a well. And so that's part of that story. So the miracle there saves, by the way, it's an interesting thing to think about. It saves the stranger at the end of that story. I mean, Hagar and Ishmael are the strangers, and Muslims trace their lineage to Abraham through Ishmael. And here in our own Torah, the stranger is saved by a miracle. I think there's a thought. Yes? No? Yeah.
Well, my thought sort of was embedded within that story, which is you got two strange people potentially walking into the desert. Who's going to go into the desert? Just two people walking.
With only a jug, yeah.
And so who sent them on their way? Why did they send them? And was it a punishment that they were trying to be meted? So it's the story that you overlapped with, my thought, was an answer to that question that I had, but it's something to consider.
It is interesting. There are stories all the time. I happen to often go to Israel during the summer, and there's almost always a story on the news where someone went into the desert without enough preparation. I find it a bit staggering, and not to be judgmental, but it happens like every summer. I assume it happens out west as well. You know, either they get lost, or they didn't bring enough water, or whatever it might be, and people get into trouble. So it's really interesting that the law, which often follows Akiva, is that, like, okay, someone should live. If it's a terrible choice to have to make, you shouldn't have to make that choice, but someone should live. Because if no one lives, then how is this whole thing preserving life? I mean, that's the text. Another thought? Wait one sec.
Wasn't there a story a number of years ago, a true story, of an airplane that went down in the Andes, and they cannibalized one of the people who went down?
Yeah, the cannibalism's not in the Talmud, so I'm going to leave that aside as advice, Mike. So yeah, the story is, I understand the story. Like, you got to do something to save, right? You got to do something to save life and preserve life, because this whole project, the Jewish project, in other words, is about preserving life. That's the idea. I want to turn you to, there's a couple of famous rabbinic texts. First of all, Rabbi Hillel said, "If I am not for myself, Imene Nili Mili, who is for me? But if I'm for my own self, if I'm only for myself, what am I? And if not now, when?" So, in other words, if you're only for yourself, then it's also what's life? It doesn't make any sense. It doesn't make any sense if you're just only about your own needs. And then finally, and I want to conclude with this, I want to read both of these texts and then give a little more time for conversation. These are two rabbinic texts on the second page that address the question at hand very directly in terms of our responsibilities to Gaza and to Palestinians. The Talmudic sage, Rabbi Chama ben Rabbi Hanina, says, "Even though your enemy intended to kill you, if he arrives hungry or thirsty in your house, feed him and give him water. Why? For you will be heaping live coals upon his head, and the Lord will reward you." Yishalem. Do not read "will reward you," but rather "will bring peace between him and you." And the next text, I'm going to give you both of them. Hashkem lahargecha, bala hargecha hashkem lahargo, which means if someone comes to kill you, get up earlier and kill him first. These are both rabbinic texts, folks, and I wanted to give you both of them. Our tradition, does not speak with one voice. It has multiple opinions. And one of the challenges we have in our own day and age is that these questions about enemies in particular and war were written by rabbis who were sitting around tables, not with an army and a state. I mean, so these were theoretical discussions in many regards because we didn't have the power of a state. So you have both texts. You have both. They clearly do not agree with each other. Now, I just want to highlight why even the first text is not completely altruistic. It is suggesting that the reason why you should feed and offer water is because you're going to get peace in return. You're going to get something back. The second text is somewhat skeptical. Like, hey, if you know what his or her intentions are, you got to get up earlier and take care of business, if you'll forgive me for being so crass, and do that. These are two texts in our tradition. So questions or thoughts or responses to this to round it out? John, oh, go ahead. Pick your person, Bruce.
I think the approach that says to give the person something to eat in the hope that you may have a reconciliation is similar to the approach in the previous text where if two people go out and they share the water, there's always the hope that something else may happen.
Right.
In the sense of God will provide, or maybe you'll find a spring along the way. So I think there's a similarity here where both of these have an element of hope and faith in them. I'm not saying those are the right ways to go, but I think there's...
Well, if I can put you on the spot, does that resonate more with you than the kind of very crass, practical second text that says, get up earlier and kill him first?
I'm not sure.
Okay.
I'm really not
fair.
sure.
That's fair. Go ahead. There was another thought, I think. Steve.
I don't think the two texts are mutually exclusive. I think it has to do with really what your expectations of the actions of the enemy are. Because really, if you really believe that this person is going to kill you, you can give them all the food in the world, but you expect that they're going to kill you, then the second text seems to make more sense. But if you believe that there is a potential that this person won't kill you and that they're actually your enemy for enemy's sake, then it does make sense to try to make peace. So they're not mutually exclusive, but if you really, really believe that this person is going to try to kill you, you probably have no choice whatsoever but to take the action first.
Right, but however, the first text does say, even though your enemy intended to kill you. So like you do, so in both instances, the tradition seems to be suggesting that you have an inkling of what their intention might be. And so it's very, very challenging. We have a few more thoughts, a few more minutes.
Okay, Rabbi, I know you wanted to bring it down to Gaza and Israel. So I'll just say that if you recall, Israel was in Gaza years ago, and they had this thriving flower business, and they left it to the Palestinians, and they burnt all the hothouses, all the flower houses down. They said,
You mean when Israel withdrew in
Right.
the disengagement, yeah.
Right, and so I'll turn to, I think it was Confucius who said, fool me once, shame on you, fool me twice, shame on me. We already know that they're not going to be, friendly towards us, and we have October 7th to completely, verify that. So the answer is, if I know you're going to come kill me, I have to go out and defend myself and kill you first.
Okay. I mean, well, it's certainly part of the Jewish tradition that we have to protect our own lives. We have to hold on to that one jug of water ourselves, if you will. I think we can have different responses, but I'll save some more for Yom Kippur morning. But go ahead, one more thought.
Last one.
To tie it back to my strength earlier, and the view of the first one for me is, if you coming and your intention is to kill me, but you're hungry and you're thirsty, you're probably not strong enough to kill me, and I think a lot of it is quite subjective. So I'm going to have a little bit of God's will and hope that if I feed you, then God can intervene and we can come to better terms, because you're not coming strong enough for me. So there is that window, right?
That's interesting that the person in the first instance has a weakened state.
Right. You probably can't. How are you going to kill me if you're that? But the second one now, I look at it in two ways. If I know that you can and you're coming for me, do I go for you? Do I then become the aggressor? I'm not so sure I can get to that. But the second view of it is, now if you come for me, you're here, you're strong, well, then I am going to take you. It becomes, because that's what God is testing me, right? He wants one of us to live. And in that case, if you actually have the capacity to end my life, well, then perhaps it's the strength issue again, right, for me.
Okay. So, I mean, look, a few final thoughts. I'm going to leave the poem for you to read at another time, which is by an Israeli poet who wrote this poem soon after October 7th. A couple of things to round out our discussion. Judaism's not a pacifist tradition. It recognizes the need for self-defense. It recognizes the need for war. Much of what the rabbis have written about this, to be very candid, have been tested by our current circumstances. Because we wrote theories that were somewhat untested because we didn't have power. And so this is a very new and different situation. I would like to think that we can figure out a way to have compassion for others, that we can be, whether it's the neighbor, the stranger, or even the enemy, that we can figure out how to be compassionate towards others. I am not suggesting that this is simple and uncomplicated. It's obviously extremely complicated, especially when we're talking about resources and life. But I think one of Judaism's central teachings is about how we are compassionate to others and how we respond to others. I mean, I don't think that we are supposed to be just about ourselves. We are supposed to think about how to respond to others. And all these texts touched on that. And they obviously, you know, there's a movement. There's neighbor, stranger, enemy, right? And so do we have different obligations to each of these depending on where they are on that hierarchy? I don't know, but are we supposed to respond to the world with compassion because we understand the feelings of the stranger? Yes. I mean, I think that is Judaism's central teaching. I'm not suggesting there are simple answers to today's dilemmas, but that is a central teaching. So I hope you will hold on to some of these thoughts and some of these texts. I encourage you to read the poem, which is a beautiful poem, on your own. And then we'll turn now to our concluding prayer.